Here's what you need to know about Fujifilm's X-S20. With Fujifilm's latest camera, the X-S20, they have designed a number of features into this camera to ensure that it serves the needs of the most enthusiastic content creators. What this means for you is that shooting with this camera ensures that post-production is minimized and functions are quicker to set. The camera is discreet, compact, and easy to use. The camera also has a very narrow design, making this very easy to shove into your coat pocket at a moment's notice. And the camera, of course, has a very angled LCD screen, which is a standard for a lot of content creators, particularly those who are solo or want to do a bit more selfie-related content. Simple flip of the screen and you're ready to go. This camera has a number of features, which we'll cover today, that ensure that this camera is automated and sped up on a number of necessary processes in your camera. This camera has double the battery life. The battery that this camera uses is an MPW235 Lion battery. The X-S10 had a capacity for 350 frames, whereas the new battery in the X-S20 has a capacity for 750 frames, which is more than double the previous battery's life. You can actually squeeze a little bit more juice out of this camera battery by moving the camera into economy mode, which moves the frame limit up from 750 frames to 800 frames. Now for some content creators, this is going to be useful, as sometimes you don't necessarily plan to attend for say 2 hours and then go home. Sometimes you might go to a big festival where events carry into the day and the night. So you want a battery that will last you through the day and night. So perhaps the most significant feature in this camera, and what really pushes it into being an excellent choice for any content creators and vloggers, is that this camera has a vlog mode on the dial. This mode brings a number of features that might otherwise be tucked in the menu of your camera right to the forefront on your LCD screen. For starters, you have a self timer which can be adjusted from 5, 10, 15 seconds or just off. You have a high speed recording option which is good for all your slow-mo shots, and this camera can record at 240 frames in HD resolution. There is also an internal stabilization option which can be flicked off on this camera. There's a subject detection option which is very vital for your autofocus, which ensures that you can select autofocus to detect your subject, like a person walking past, or your eyes, or even just one of your eyes. There's also a product priority autofocus option, which will flick off your standard autofocus and ensure that any focus takes priority on any product that you might hold up to the camera.
Okay, so now I've got the product priority focus on. I'm gonna hold this up in front of my face, and it should be pulling focus onto the product in front of me. I mean, it doesn't have necessarily be a product, it could just be anything in the foreground. So the focus right now is locked onto my eyes, but as soon as I raise my hand to the camera, focus pulls onto my hand.
So the vlog mode ensures that you have quick access to a number of features that are necessary to a vlogger. But do keep in mind that when you are recording in vlog mode, you cannot adjust these settings during. And finally, you have a background to focus button, which throws out the background just a little bit to help your subject that's in focus stand out that much more. Now the vlog mode isn't the only significant mode that's included in this camera. You also have a newly adjusted auto mode. The auto mode in this camera is your standard setup. It adjusts all the necessary features such as ISO and shutter speed, but extends beyond that into autofocus. In auto mode, this camera is able to identify a variety of subjects without necessarily having to be set to identify those specific subjects. Auto mode is great for those of you who want to jump into using this camera right away, but haven't necessarily had a chance to fully acquaint themselves with the camera itself. In addition, auto mode is also good for those of you who have the perfect moment present itself, but haven't had the chance to necessarily make the necessary adjustments to your camera. Auto mode is heavily locked, as in you can't make any changes on it. It locks it all off. So if you want to make adjustments to the autofocus or any of the settings, you're better off switching to another mode on this camera. Despite the small size of this camera, it kicks absolute butt when it comes to internal recording resolution. The sensor in this camera is an X Trans CMOS sensor with an X Processor 5 at 26.1 megapixels, which ensures you can hit the high resolutions. The sensor is also back illuminated, which allows more light into the image, ensuring that you have a reduction in noise and an increase in quality. At its highest performance specs, this camera records at 6.2K at 30p with a chroma subsampling of 422 and a bit depth of 10. This means you have some very rich colors coming out in a very high quality image. Another thing to note is that this camera can also reach 4K at 60p. Now for some, particularly if you're a smaller content creator or a vlogger, 6.2K might feel like a bit of overkill as they are very large files at a very high resolution. Particularly as most people don't watch most of their footage in 6K. I mean, some people have 4K TVs, but most of us watch our stuff on phones or smaller TVs. The value of 6.2K is it allows for greater flexibility in post. With a 6K image, you have more pixels in the frame, which means you're able to crop further in on the image without losing quality of the image itself. Now this is great for those of us that have to shoot both landscape and portrait content, as it means that we simply just have to shoot a little bit wider and crop from there. Another thing that lends to the resolution of this camera is its open gate. Or, well, you know, let's get more technical here. Technically, it's not an open gate as so much as it's a full sensor recording. Now, full sensor recording means that everything that hits the sensor of your camera is processed and fed back to you. With some cameras, you don't have a full sensor recording or a closed gate, and it tends to sometimes crop off the image bit, and you lose some of that information within the camera. But with this camera, you have a 3:2 aspect ratio. So when you combine the open gate, full sensor recording, with a 6.2K resolution of this camera, you do have a lot of room in post to crop this image in any which way you want. The autofocus in this camera is made of AI deep learning technology. What's significant about this AI is that in the name, deep learning, this camera has crammed a whole lot of information into the AI to ensure that this camera has very fast acting autofocus. What this means is that the camera is able to quickly identify subjects, which means it doesn't necessarily have to take time identifying the subjects in the frame and learning them in order to function at its highest capacity. The subject detection in this camera is expansive. We of course already mentioned that there is people and products, but this camera can also identify planes, bikes, bicycles, trains, cars, insects, and even drones. If you go into the settings of this camera, you'll also find a number of custom autofocus settings to suit your specific needs. You have standard multi-purpose autofocus, which is just your all-rounder. You have your pop-in autofocus, which is good for when your subject is going to pop into frame. You have ignore obstacle autofocus, which ensures that your subject's autofocus doesn't get ripped away by an object in the foreground. You have accel and decel autofocus, acceleration and deceleration autofocus, which is good for when your subject is, say, speeding up or slowing down. And for your more frantic subjects, you also have erratic accel and decel. So don't have a tripod or hate doing this? Well, not a problem, because this camera has 5-axis stabilization, which makes all those handheld shots of yours that much smoother. The stabilization in this camera is also a step up from the X-S20, going from 6 stops to 7 stops, meaning you can shoot this camera in darker situations. Now on the side, the camera also has a 3.5mm jack port, which obviously you plug your headphones into. But what's significant about the design on this camera is that the jack port is on the opposite side of the microphone port. I personally like this as it means that you can have your headphone cords going one way and your microphone cords going the other way, which means they're not getting all tangled up on the side. They're perfectly clear and away from each other. Chances are you will be using both headphones and a microphone, so it's good to have this bit of space in between the two. Now this camera was actually a dual release and was released alongside the XF8mm 3.5 lens from Fujifilm. As you can see with the images I took, this is actually one of Fujifilm's widest lenses in the XF series. It's a great lens for capturing wide spaces and buildings and all sorts of things where you have to cram a lot of detail from a very broad space into your camera. The lens weighs 215 grams, which is fairly light, has a filter diameter of 62mm, and it is a 12mm equivalent in a 35mm format. Honestly, this is an amazing lens for capturing a lot of building shots. Personally, I wasn't a fan of it for more closer shots. As you would see, it would distort my face a fair bit, but I really did have a lot of fun shooting a lot of architecture with this lens. It was just simply amazing and it improved the images so much. Like, honestly, what I was seeing versus what was showing up in the camera, I prefer what was showing up in the camera. Another thing to also consider about this lens is it is actually a weather resistant lens. Now you have a lens that is dust and drip resistant and can operate in -10 degrees Celsius. So tell me, does this camera interest you, or does this lens interest you? And if so, what would you plan to shoot with them if you had them? Please let us know in the comments below.